Welcome back to the Journey in Recovery series. My name is Justin. I am a son of God and a recovering addict. And by the grace of God, the fellowship of the 12-step fellowships, the fellowship of other addicts like me, working the steps, and just the grace of God, I'm sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And what a miracle and blessing that is in my life. Today, we continue the Journey in Recovery series, and we will be talking with John. But before we get started, just a little recap on the Journey in Recovery series in RICO 12. A few years ago, I was hosting a different podcast called Journey Through Life, and during that podcast, I felt prompted, I felt compelled by my higher power to do a 12-week series on each of the 12 steps of recovery. Now, Journey Through Life was not a recovery-based podcast, although I was working my recovery at that time. It was a long-form interview type podcast where I interviewed normal people with extraordinary stories. And while doing that and doing this 12-week series, I gained so much information on recovery, and it opened my eyes and my world to different ways of seeing the same problems, different ways of understanding that the problem is the same and the solution is the same, no matter what the addiction or affliction. Anyways, now we're doing it in RICO 12 in the month of the month of December. Starting January 6th, we will go right back to our live Zoom meetings every Friday at noon Central Time. To get on that email list, go send an email to rico12pod@gmail.com or go to rico12.com /join us, and you can jump in on that email list, and you will get notifications and links to those live meetings that, like I said, are held every Friday at noon Central Time. Now, if you find value in RICO 12, please consider rating and reviewing RICO 12 in the podcast platform of your choice. And even more importantly, please consider sharing it with your recovery network, with your friends and family who you think might benefit from these messages or from an individual message. Share it with them. Tell them, hey, you got to check this out. Also consider donating. You can do that at the links that are in the show notes of this episode and all the other episodes. All right, well, let's get ready to get going. This episode, like I said, is with John. And here's a little bit of information on John. John is going to be sharing with us his experience, strength, and hope in relation to Step 8. He is a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and you can just hear the value he puts on being honest with himself and with others in this conversation. Honesty with self and others is really one of the cores of real recovery from anything, including addiction. John talks about his walk through decades of addiction and choices that brought him to the place of becoming willing to make amends and then making amends. Once again, you can just hear the efforts at being completely honest with himself and with others and his desire to help all and share the message of recovery with everyone. This is an honest and open conversation with a man who has seen the light and strives to walk in it. Okay, this is episode 139 of the RICO 12 podcast. Let's get to it with John. Here we go. All right, so through the magic of internet and video camera, I'm sitting here face to face with John. I'm excited about this, excited to get to know you and your story. So introduce yourself as if you were sitting in a room, and tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my name is John. I am an addict.
Hi, John.
Hi, Justin.
Tell me a little bit about your addiction, and then we'll get into the story behind it.
Okay. So I was addicted to heroin, methadone, cocaine. And after I had stopped all of that for 5 years, I realized that I had also been addicted to alcohol as a teenager and a young man.
So kind of alcohol was your gateway into those other things? Am I understanding that correctly?
It's the first drug that I turned to, yes.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your first experiences with alcohol and what made you, as you've come through these other drugs and substances, what made you go back to alcohol and think, I'm an alcoholic and I
found that as a teen.
Yeah. So I probably had my first drink when I was 14, and nothing really happened. It was a beer, and I may have had some beers after that also without any, consequences or not really thinking anything was wrong. And then when I was 15, me and another fella, well, he was experiencing what he was doing, and he brought a pint of wine, and we started to drink it, and that was the first time basically I lost control, where I couldn't control the amount that I was going to have. I drank much more than was a normal person would have. In other words, when I felt it coming on, I just kept drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I got very drunk to the point where when I went home, my mother noticed that I was drunk.
And do you remember what your mom said when you got home for that first time that she noticed that?
It's interesting you asked that because, yeah, she's the first thing she told me is your shirt is inside out and you're drunk, and so I always say that was the story of my life, that everything was kind of inside out, upside down for the next 30 years. My father was a drinker. He may not have been an alcoholic, but he was definitely a hard drinker. So my mother was really used to that, and she wasn't kind of freaked out by it, other than she probably scolded me and told me not to do that again.
Mm. And how did that work, her telling you not to do that again?
Well, I mean, I don't, it never played into that I did it again. It's just that what I was finding from the alcohol was what they talk about in the big book, which was alcoholics drink because they like the feeling and it provides a sense of ease and comfort.
Mm-hmm.
I had just came to this country a year earlier at 14 from England.
Oh.
I didn't adjust well. I was probably depressed. I was homesick. I was lonesome for London. And, you take a drink and that all goes away. And, I've learned throughout the years that the addiction is just a symbol, but it's the underlying actually selfishness and self-centeredness that is the issue. Always about ourselves and, selfish actions is what the underlying problem is.
Interesting. So you moved from England to the United States as a youth, and I didn't pick up on that being the accent that I heard as an English accent until you said London. I was like, oh. So tell me a little bit about where you settled in, geographically in the United States.
We came from London, myself, my father, and my mother and my youngest sister, to live with my mother's older sister, who she really didn't know that well because there was like a 19-year age difference. And we were kind of under the impression that America was that the streets were paved with gold or the pavements were paved in gold. It was kind of expression that people used at that time. And we had a very hard time acclimate, especially my father. My father, he was promised a job in order to come over here. And when he arrived, he found out that was basically, my uncle had said that he had a job so that he could come over, but that he would help him to get a job. And my father basically found his own work. It was very stressful initially because nobody was working. And my mother and father weren't working. They were very hardworking individuals, and that was freaking them out.
And about what year was that when you guys came over?
1961. And we moved into an apartment with my mother, with my aunt, my uncle, and I believe there was three cousins living there also. And then it was my mother and father and, myself and my sister. So it was very crowded. And, that whole thing also that after 3 days, it's like a no-go with relatives, So we were starting to get on each other's nerve. I think we lived there for probably a month or two.
And with those stresses in life, it's not a huge surprise that when you found an escape to that through whatever medium it would have been, alcohol in this case, you found it. How do you think that those experiences continued to develop as you walked through the paths of addiction from alcohol to the other substances you talked about?
When I was 14, I was already a heavy smoker, and
Mm.
that was part of the addiction also. And anything that was going on contributed to the idea that I needed to drink. The alcohol became the solution to my problems, which was I was having difficulty really growing up as an adolescent and a teenager, and was looking for escape. Was looking for escape. Couldn't really deal well with other people, with girls, with ideas of having a kind of plan to go to college and or finish high school, go to college and work and marry. That was never. I don't know if any teenagers thinks of that beginning in teenagehood, but I think at some point they may start to think about it as they reach maybe high school and are ready to enter college. But all I could think of was basically getting high in one form or another and kind of escaping all of that.
Hmm. So when did you realize, hey, I might have a problem and it might be causing me harm and those around me harm?
Justin, I don't think I ever realized that. I don't think I realized that. And, everybody else knew that I had the problem and told me I had the problem. But I always thought that either I wasn't doing it well enough, I didn't have enough of it, or I had just basically, especially when I turned to drugs, I bought into the lifestyle that went along with drugs.
Hmm.
And so never really thought that there was a problem. It was just that the problem was that I couldn't get enough of it. And if I didn't have it, I would, start to withdraw or get sick. And then that would always spur me on to getting more drugs or trying to get more drugs.
Hmm.
I just on an aside, when I realized I had the problem was when I had already stopped using drugs in a rehab, and during that rehab stay, I had the thought, which I had never had before, that guess what, John? When you leave here, you're going to use drugs again. You're going to drink and use drugs. And I had never had that thought before. I'd always had the thought that, oh, this time it's going to be different. I'm not gonna do it again. Always in my head it was that someday things would be normal. I would get married, I would have the house, the picket fence, the white picket,
Mm-hmm.
the 2.5 kids. It would the nuclear family that he used to talk about years ago, that somehow that would magically happen and I would stop drinking.
Hmm.
But I had no clue what the problem was. I had no clue what the solution was. And, that was the first indication of, it was really a first step experience, which was that I knew that I couldn't stop.
And about what year was this experience here in the rehab where that you had that thought?
I was 45 at that.
Hmm. So is that what you equate your rock bottom? Is that where your rock bottom was, or did you have to find rock bottom somewhere else after that?
I would say that was the rock bottom as far as I then had maybe, was close to like the desperation of a drowning man, like, because I never thought that I wasn't in control. Now I knew I wasn't, and what do I do about that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've had many rock bottoms as far as consequences, but that was kind of a rock bottom of where I understood the problem. And even then, I would say that I hadn't drank for maybe or used drugs for 25 years when I really knew what the problem was, as it is explained in the doctor's opinion in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah.
So at that point, as you came to yourself, I guess, and realized, hey, I got a problem and I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know what the solution is. How had you attended 12 step meetings before that point, or was it just rehab facilities?
I had actually attended. I mean, a big part of my story, as far as that, I had been in prison, and after I was there a while, I was attending a a program in New York State that was in the prison system, and they actually utilized the 12 steps. And
Mm-hmm.
but there wasn't an emphasis on the steps, of course. And then there was an argument one day about higher power, and I admitted that I believed in a higher power or God, but that I hadn't any relationship with him, and I hadn't prayed or attended any service for the last 30 years, and that I didn't know where he was, but it was something way out in the universe. And but that shortly after that, I don't know if I was walking in the prison, if I was back in my living quarter, whatever it was. I don't know exactly where I was, but I asked God to lift the obsession to use drugs, and it was lifted that day. I never had the obsession since then. I stopped all of the drug seeking and drug using behaviors that I was doing in the prison, because there was drugs there. And then was eventually paroled. But I gave this kind of lip service to God, that basically God was somebody that I could possibly call on once in a while if I needed him. But never had any, I think I said a prayer in the morning, and that was about it. But I hadn't changed in any way at all, other than I didn't use drugs. And then when I was paroled, I didn't attend meetings. They had suggested to attend meetings. And it was all fear-based. I didn't realize it then. And that's why I didn't go. So I then did in the rehab, that meetings came in and they took us out to meetings. And I just hit the ground running to attend meetings after that.
Interesting. And so tell me about your first, at least your first meaningful experience with the steps, maybe getting a sponsor for the first time, and how, what sort of awakenings may have happened as you went through that.
I went to my first meeting, and it was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. I was very much welcomed there during the secondaries break. Everybody started cheering and stomping on the floor. And I felt that I was home, that I had, that now I belong somewhere. Prior, when I was paroled, I was basically completely isolated and by myself a lot. So now I was around people, and that was very important. And, I always wanted to do the steps and change sponsors to try and accomplish that. I did the steps through a book. I don't want to mention the name of it. It was written by one person. And at that point, that was probably what I needed to do. And I did it with a sponsor. Of course, I wrote my fourth step, and he heard my fifth step. And then, so I'd already celebrated a year. In NA, tradition at that point, maybe still is, I'm not sure, I don't attend them, the NA meetings any longer. It was that, you took quite a while to do the steps, and maybe you would do your fourth step after you celebrated your first year. So I did my fourth step before I celebrated my first year, and then my fifth step. And then I asked my sponsor to do the sixth step and the seventh. And he was honest enough to tell me that he hadn't done them. So, and he encouraged me to get another sponsor. I did get another sponsor, and he started me back on the fourth step again. So about the time I got through the steps, I was sober and clean a few years. And actually, when we got to the 10th step, he had never done them either. And I said, well, look, because they were writing all the steps. I said, just, write the 10th step, and then we'll go over it, write the 11th. And he did that. And so I got through those steps like that. Again, God is in charge, and it was probably all I was capable of doing. And I didn't do any other step work probably for another 16, 17 years.
So after 16, 17 years, what made you decide to do further step work? What triggered that decision?
Yeah, I was holding a tremendous resentment against somebody. And, it was, it was eating away at me. And somebody said to me, you need to do the 4-step through the big book. And, I resisted, and I was holding on to the idea that I was clean a long time, that somehow that meant something. So I didn't buy it initially, but then I did, and I found the results of that were very helpful, especially with the resentments.
So why was it different, the way you went through it with the big book rather than the other book that you had originally done it? Why did resentments become more, I guess, able to be released or gotten rid of because of the way you went through the steps the second, or the step 4 anyways, the second time?
So the big book is the original document on the steps, and they give you precise, exact, specific instructions on how to take the steps. And when you put down the resentments, you put the person or the institution or whoever you're resentful at, then the cause. And then the third column is what it affects. And that's really what God should be managing anyway. And then the fourth column is when they say that kind of, now look at your side of the street. Where are you selfish? Where are you dishonest? Where are you self-seeking? And where are you in fear?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you fearful? So I was able to look at it that I realized every resentment I had where I was selfish, I basically wanted my own way. And then the dishonesty was either it was an unreasonable expectation. I had actually done that very thing myself. It was actually none of my business.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is from the big book, that part there about dishonesty. But it was very freeing. The big book way of doing the 4-step is very freeing.
So after you did the big book 4-step, did you also go through and do steps 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 from that?
I actually didn't. The person I did it with, he probably assumed I had done those steps, and to a certain extent I had. But I then, later on, a couple of years later, I spoke at a rehab, and this gentleman that I met there, he asked me if I had ever done the steps through the big book. I started talking about the 4-step, and he said, no, all the steps. And I said, no, I haven't. And again, he said, I'd like to take you through them. And again, I balked at it. I mean, really balked at this. And because I met him several times after that. And each time I met him, he says, are you up for doing those steps? And it was actually the way it was a meeting where it was like the meeting before the AA meeting, where it was just studying how people were doing the steps, but it was all according to a certain formula. And I did eventually agree to do that. And that was very helpful also.
Well, that's really interesting, your progression through the steps. I mean, you had been sober for how long when you finally said with this person that you met in that rehab where you were speaking and finally said, yeah, let's work through the steps, all the steps as the big book lays it out. How long had you been sober up to that point?
I was probably sober 24 years then.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting. So do you think that those 24 years you were staying sober because of the fellowship or because of the step work you had done? Tell me a little bit about how you think you were able to stay sober for those 24 years.
Early in, I guess I was sober maybe a year, 2 or 3 years. I started to do this certain form of meditation, Christian meditation, that I would do it in the morning and in the afternoon. And I think that kept me sober. But I didn't have the promises, and I wasn't happy, joyous, and free. At times I was, but it wasn't like I wasn't at peace with myself. And I believe the reason for that is that I wasn't, what the big book says, which is that as ex-problem drinkers, our thoughts should be constantly of others and how we can meet their needs. And then actually in the 9th step, it says our purpose is to fit ourselves to serve God and others. And in the 12, all through the big book, and even the prayers, the third step and the seventh step prayers, they're basically the wind up of each of the prayers is so you can help other people. I never quite resonated with that the way like an awakening would probably have produced that. And yeah, if you asked me to help you, I would help you, but I wasn't going to go out of my way to do that. And that's not what Dr. Bill and Bob did. They went to a hospital to find somebody. So that part of the program really, it has to do with the root of the problem, which is selfishness and self-centeredness.
Right. So to me, I'm going to kind of reflect this back at you and see if I'm understanding it correctly. So to me, it sounds like for those 24 years, you were maintaining sobriety through your connection with God.
And I was going to meetings also. I was going to meetings. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So my understanding and my experience is that, steps 1, 2, and 3, I'm establishing I'm powerless. There's some hope there, but the hope relies on me turning my will and my life over to my higher power. Step 4 and 5 is kind of me getting right with myself and saying, okay, looking at the mirror and seeing who I am and then dumping that basically. And 6 and 7 is kind of getting right with God. And then 8 and 9 is trying to get right with my fellow man and then moving on, then serving others and having that spiritual awakening. Am I reflecting that kind of correctly to you? Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah. No, sure. Yeah. In the third step, it says right before the prayer that God will provide everything. And you have 2 tasks to do, and it's to get close to him and to do his work well.
Mm.
And the other thing I didn't mention is that when I did this, talking about the 8th step, when I did the 8th step in NA, when I was either 2, 3, 4 years, I put everything down where I had caused harm.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it had to do with criminal activity. And my sponsor just said to me, oh, you've served time, and you've made your amends. So when paralleling that resentment with that fella that I had, there was a nagging thought about that because somebody had asked me a year or 2 before that, hey, what'd you do with those amends? How'd you make those amends? And I said, oh, my sponsor just said I didn't have to do them. So now I had a thought about that for quite a while, which was it was wrong. And recently I've come to realize that even then I had the willingness to make those amends. I had the willingness, and that's all they ask of us in the 8th and 9th step, as long as we have the willingness. That there's some amends we probably couldn't make.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those amends I've tried to go back and make them also.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that. And something you said a few minutes ago kind of just turned a light on in my head. And I want to dig there for just a minute before we jump into step 8, which is will be our focus here in our conversation. You said something to the effect of, if I would have had a spiritual awakening, I don't know if you said spiritual, but you said awakening. And, as you know, the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, when did that spiritual awakening happen in your own experience? Or is it something you're still working on? Tell me about that.
Well, I don't think I would work on it. God would work on it.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. Awakening. I believe that, I haven't drank now in quite a while, that since my first day of not drinking and turning to God in the prison, that it's been a never, awakening. It's going on and on. And I think in the back of the big book, they talk about spiritual experience. They either say it's educational or, so I'm being educated.
Yeah. So what is what do you think your spiritual awakening I don't know, status is the right word. That's such a terrible word in this, but where do you think you are on that process? I mean, as you look at your own conversion to God. How do you feel about that right now, as opposed to, as you shared a few minutes ago, you had not yet had that awakening?
I mean, where I am now is basically there's a phrase, trust God, clean house, and help others.
Hmm.
So, and we do that in the action steps, which are at the end of the third step. They tell you now we're going to launch into action, vigorous action, actually.
Hmm.
That's 4 and 9 is to clean house.
Hmm.
And then when we clean house, basically we live in step 10, 11, and 12.
Hmm.
And I would say that that's where I'm at now. I'm living in step 10, 11, and 12. There's constant reminders in those, especially 10, 11, on what to do throughout the day, starting in the morning on awakening and asking God to direct your thinking. And then, pause when agitated during the day and ask God what to do, or how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. They actually say that should be a constant thought throughout the day. And it actually that's the proper use of the will. And in the 11th step at the end there, the last page says, many times during the day, we should be saying, thy will, not mine, be done. Then we're less likely. And the first thing they say we're less likely to be in is excitement.
So you mentioned here just a minute ago, steps 3 and 9 are the cleaning of house. Step 3 is my cleaning of my house,
No,
cleaning out.
fourth.
I'm sorry. That's what I meant. The fourth step, cleaning of my own house and everything, of my interior relationship with myself. Step 9, kind of cleaning my house with my relationship with others.
Right.
And step 8 is the willingness, becoming willing to clean my house in relationship to others. And I'm going to go ahead and read what step 8 is real quick, word for word, so everybody listening has this. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So I love the word willing in a lot of different places. What does that, I guess, principle or that step mean to you as it's written? And then tell me a little bit about the word willing, if you wouldn't mind.
If I'm working with somebody, I ask them to repeatedly read that passage where it says, we're now at step 8 and 9. I think it's about 8 pages to how to make amends. And in like right after they talk about having the willingness to make the amends, it says, I think it asks the question, are you willing to go to any length to victory over alcohol? And it's in italics, which means anything in the big book in italics means it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
But also further on, they say, they kind of ask the same question: are you willing to go to any lengths for the experience, for a spiritual experience? And so those two things kind of provide the push towards the willingness. And also, if you don't have it, if you don't have willingness, you can pray to God and ask for willingness. And some of what you're listing in your 8th step, you may not have the willingness, and you may want to just the ones you don't have the willingness, say that I can do it later. But there's ones that I'm going to have the willingness to make, and I'll make them. I believe as you're making the amends, you're going to develop the willingness to want to do the other amends also.
So, John, earlier in this conversation, you said that you were holding on to a resentment, a serious resentment against somebody else that was really causing some, and I'm going to put words in your mouth here, but restlessness, irritability, discontent in your own life. And it was causing some issues. And then you went back through the steps again. Tell me a little bit about your experience there when you got to step 8 with this particular person that you had all these resentments for. Were you initially willing to make amends with that person?
No, I wasn't initially, because I was in a place of self-righteousness that this guy was wrong and I was right. And in fact, I was actually trying to tell his family members he was. which is usually not a good go, but uh, that's how much I thought that I was right. And so he went on my 8-step list. I actually made an amends to him. I wrote him a letter. He was incarcerated at the time, and I told him that I had, that I ran a resentment. I was running resentments against him all the time. I didn't mention his part. That I was self-righteous. I was character assassinating him. I withheld friendship from him, withheld love from him. I was the godfather to one of his children. Yeah, I had the willingness to do that. What happened more with that was the 4th step, which I saw in the dishonesty part of the 4th step, where I'm looking at my side of the street, that I was dishonest in how I was looking at what happened. I wasn't looking at it fully. And I wasn't looking at what my part was in it, which was the thing. It involved a lot of money, but he never asked me for the money. I willingly gave him the money. And I gave him the money because I was looking for more money back. He was investing. And I was looking, so there was a sense of greed also, because the thing looked like it was too good to be true. And usually if that's the case, that's exactly what happens.
So one thing that I find in my own life and also in working with others through the steps is that something like what you shared here, sometimes there's situations where it's really, really hard to see my own part in it. I may truly be a victim, but for me, it's really important to recognize, even if my part is like 1% of the whole or less than 1% of the whole, to recognize that. Tell me about how you look at those types of situations where it really, truly can be looked at as a victim type situation, and how I then recognize either my part or how that my part maybe grew and it affected other relationships in the future from that.
In the 3rd step, where it talks about that our root problem is selfishness, self-centeredness, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. And then under that, it says that we are extreme examples of self-will run riot, but also that our problems are of our own making. So whenever I have an issue now where there's, especially to do with other people, where I'm starting to feel resentful, I know that I may not know it at the moment, but at some point it'll come to me that there's something wrong with me in this. And so I may call somebody if I recognize at that point, I'm going to ask God to remove the feeling that I have about that. And then I'll call somebody, especially if I did something blatantly out of line, to see what and how I should make an amends. And then it actually says, and then resolutely look for someone to help, which I don't do at that point. But then if I have missed it during the day and at night, when I do the nightly review, I go over where was I resentful, where was I selfish, where was I dishonest, and where was I in fear, where was I afraid. And actually, what happens is a lot of times it just pops up during that time. God is working at that point too. And then, was I thinking about myself most of the time, or was I thinking of others, how I could be helpful to them? Do I owe anybody an apology? It all helps to just jog my memory, possibly. And then that's the that's what it says at the beginning of the 10th step, that we can continuously, watch ourselves and for anything else also, but impatience or intolerance, but specifically for selfishness, dishonesty, and fear, and but also in the 10th step it says that throughout the day we should be asking God, how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. If I'm doing that, a lot of that, then this other stuff is less likely to happen. In the 11th step, so I don't say, oh, this is the 10th step. Oh, this is, it's just, I wanted to try and come naturally that throughout the day I'm asking God, how can I best serve thee?
Yeah.
So how I can best serve God is I have to be thinking of how I can help people, and basically taking persons through the steps, and where I'm going to find those people to do that. And a lot of times it's not at meetings.
Hmm.
So if I'm thinking a lot about that, a lot of this other stuff is not going to raise its ugly head.
Hmm. I like what you said there, and I'm going to come back to it here in a few minutes, but I want to dig a little bit more on something that you said earlier. A little earlier when we were talking about willingness in the step 8, what step 8 is, you said, sometimes one cannot be willing, but can pray for the willingness and ask God to help create that willingness to make amends. Do you have an instance that you'd like to share, or maybe your own, or maybe somebody else who you've worked with who really had a hard time with that, and then through a process, maybe a drawn out process of praying for the willingness to help somebody, that miracle happened and they were able to soften their hearts and do that?
It's a couple of places probably in the big book where it says John Barleycorn will beat you into a state of reasonableness. For the younger listeners, John Barleycorn is, alcohol. Dr. Bob, he balked at the 8th step and the 9th step. He didn't want to do that. And he went out and drank. And when he came back, he immediately, after he was sobered up, he went out one morning. He didn't come back till late at night. And he had started the process of making the amends, which took 4 years, according to that particular paragraph. I think that's in A Vision for You.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great kind of reminder that if you're not willing to do the 8th step, then become willing to make amends to people, and then do it in the 9th step. That this could possibly happen. The 9th step is, it doesn't mess around. It basically says that if you need to make amends, if you've harmed anybody, you have to do it. If you want the spiritual experience, based on that, you can't be concerned about yourself and what's the consequences going to be. That's a hard one to negotiate. Sometimes it could be just as simple as that you would be so embarrassed making the amends that I'll tell you something that where I didn't have the willingness to make this amends because I didn't think I needed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But so I work with somebody as a colleague. This is a while back, and I had gone in to her office to work in there. I actually had shared an office with her, but that was no longer my office. I had no permission to go into that office. I went in there, and then so the next day I was in the hallway, and I noticed her umbrella had been in the office. That the umbrella had been in the office. So I then saw her, and I asked her. I says, "Is this your umbrella?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, I found it in the hallway." And I gave her back the umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just really bothered me. And I finally, I called her, and I told her I wanted to talk to her. It was very hard arranging the time because we were both busy, but I finally met her, and she invited me into the office, and I told her, and I was making the amends for the lie, not the going into the office, but I told her to the office and the umbrella. Anyway, so that was a very hard amends to make based on just trying to save face, so to speak. It doesn't matter. She got her umbrella back.
Right.
She doesn't need to know because she wasn't harmed that I went into the office. She doesn't even know about it.
So, John, with that experience, a lot of people listening will justify or look at that and say, that's not a big deal. Why would that bother John to the point where he felt he had to make amends about it? And I think this is a pretty important thing to talk about here, because even little things like that can cause issues. Tell me about why it was so important for you to make that amends, and what could have happened if you let that eat at you for a while.
again, after we've done the first 9 steps, we're still taking inventory on selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. That wasn't just a lie. That was a purposeful lie. That was a lie I knew as I was saying it was a lie. So that's why it bothered me so much. I hadn't done that in years.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thing that was very in my active addiction. Was I lied all the time. Like I would lie before I told the truth, even whether I had to. I didn't have to lie, but it was so habitual, because drug use is illegal. It's illegal, and so that in a sense is trying to justify why I lied. But you just, as an addict, you just lie to everybody that you come in contact, especially employers and family. So I wanted to clean that up.
Yeah, no, that's good. And if you hadn't have cleaned it up, where could that have led?
Well, everything can lead back to the first step. So there was a couple of other, to talk to your audience. Then,
Mm-hmm.
so I had done some robberies, and I went back, and I just not that long ago, a few years ago, and I went into the places where I robbed, and I told them that I robbed them and was here to make it right. So there was a lot of fear involved with that. There was a lot of, not that there would be any consequences, but it was just, it happened so many years ago. Yeah, it's just hard to, some of the amends where you were just a thug
Mm-hmm.
are hard to make.
What were the reactions of those places that you went into to make those amends?
Well, one of them is a famous hotel in New York. I had stole a rug from there. It was, I would imagine that it was a fairly expensive rug. It wasn't from one of the rooms. It was from one of the entrances. I had just rolled it up and put it on my back and walked out of there.
Huh.
And I went back and I told them, now there's 2 things going on. One is, which I didn't realize, is that President Obama was going to be staying there that day. And I did see these guys standing around, but I didn't, I was so fearful about approaching the person. Actually, I wouldn't say fearful. It was more just nervousness, a little anxious about it. Any amends you make, God is there before you make the amends, during you make the amends, and after you make the amends. So God is always with you. And I just, I went to the front desk. I asked them who was in charge. They sent, the person came over to me. I think I may have mentioned it why I wanted, but the other person came over, and they, I told them what I had done, and they said, where is it? I said, well, this was like ages ago, many, many years ago. And they said, okay, so, they kind of put me in a position where they were thinking it was silverware or stuff like that. And all they want to do when that happens is you return it.
Right.
So the person was stuck on that. If you can return it, return it. But if you can't, that's it, So I left it at that. And actually today, thinking about those amends, again, you can actually, it says take pen to paper. You can actually make the amends through the mail. You can write a letter to make amends.
Right.
So I was thinking that there's another place too, that maybe I'll just write a letter, enclose what I thought the thing was worth, and then leave it at that. The only issue with that now, I want to talk to my sponsor about it, because some of these places that I would be making that kind of amends to have undergone new ownership, So I wouldn't be making the amends to the person that owned the place in the first place. I would be making it, So I discussing that with the sponsor. He may say to do, like, the thing I had wanted to do with that rug was to donate a rug somewhere. And I actually gave it to a friend. But prior to that, I was thinking of, there was a few places around in the county that could possibly use a rug. And then the other one was a auction house that I walked into, and I told the person that was there, I was in, Midtown Manhattan also, and they said that they weren't even alive when that happened. And so then they brought somebody else out, and they were kind of amazed at the whole thing. And then they gave me a card of the corporate lawyer for the place, and I contacted her, and we had I wrote her a letter. We had a nice back and forth on it, but did make a substantial donation to a place that teaches them the basics of artwork.
Very cool. So those are some neat experiences of, going back and making amends with old things that could still creep up and cause issues. Is there anything else in relation to becoming willing to make amends, step 8, that you feel is important to share right now before I move on to something else?
The most important thing I can think of is just to read the big book on the 8th and 9th step, and it tells you the attitude you should have when you're making the amends, and it gives you specific instructions how to make it to family. And the amends, whether the person forgives us or not, is not the point. Our point is that we want to clean our side of the street. But if you're trying to make an amends to somebody that doesn't want to hear it, you're don't do that either. Just tell them something like, well, maybe at another time we can talk about this. If they start to get upset,
right?
Because you remind them exactly what they did or why you want to make the amends, and they now remember it. They may have forgotten it or whatever. So
yeah,
I've never had an incident like that because I spent a lot of time where I didn't make any amends. When I first made amends, I did make amends to my immediate family. I did make them, and people surrounded me that I knew at that point. But a lot of those amends where I'd hurt people, harmed them, I didn't make the amends for many, many, many years. Just had an added thought also is that any sponsor that you work with, he's probably going to tell you a little different something about how to make the amends. And I think that's okay. If you don't have the willingness to make the amends, whichever the amends it is, yeah, you can talk to your sponsor about it. You may, who knows, maybe you would get willingness doing that. But if you want to keep asking God, like, how does he want you to make this amends? Does he want you to make it now? Does he want you to make it later? Like, God, again, is in charge. The person that you want to make the amends to may not be open to the amends at that point. Maybe that's why you would make it later. But you can ask God, and believe me, you'll get an answer from that.
Thank you for that. Earlier, you mentioned that, you, in your own life, some of the things you do is looking for people to serve, maybe go through the steps with. And then you said something interesting. You said, and I don't find them all in the rooms. I don't find them all in these recovery groups. Tell me about how you find people that aren't in the rooms, and then how you start serving those people and talking to them about the steps.
Like, where I would want to look for people is what you would call wind-up joints, jails, or like I met with somebody yesterday that I would like to possibly work with people to take them through the steps, but I would have to qualify them first to see if they were willing to do it.
Right.
And that was outside of a meeting. It's a nonprofit here in the county. And I'm going to a church on a Saturday that feeds the homeless and going to talk to, people there. So there are other places, and I used to chair a meeting at the jail. But in the 12th step, it says that we try to carry the message. And also, more importantly, it doesn't say it, but we're not in the result business. God is in the result business. As long as I'm trying to carry that message, I think God is all right with that. Plus, you can do other things. And like my county is economically, deprived. You can do other things, make sandwiches maybe and distribute them, or volunteer at a pantry. I pick up people in my car to drive them places. In the bad weather, it gets pretty bad up here. This winter is pretty mild, but we've had winters that are brutal. People are walking on the main street, and you could possibly help them or offer them.
Yeah. I love how you are describing the working of steps 10 through 12, especially 12 here in this last little bit here. It's good stuff and great example. And I know you do it not for your own, pumping yourself up. You do it because of the love that you have for God and the love you have for your fellow man. And
Just one last thing. At the core of my being, I'm still selfish and self-centered. So I'm not doing that on my own. God is the initiator of that. And when I was in active addiction, I was in Harlem, in New York City. I was crossing the street, and a woman was trying to get my attention. She was very old, very, very frail, and it was one of the big avenues there. And she wanted to get across it, and she was trying to get my attention. I realized that she wanted me to take her across, and I didn't want to do it. I wanted to get to where I was, but something told me to do it. And she grabbed my arm, and I walked her across. And the whole time I was thinking of where I had to go. And we get to the other side, and she just looked at me, and she was mouthing the word "thank me." She had no teeth in her mouth, and I felt a complete joy wash through me. And that's because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to help other people. But of course, I didn't recognize that as, there's something about that you should think about and look at. I'm not that deep a person that I can actually do that.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that experience too. That's very meaningful. There will be people that listen to this who are either in active addiction or maybe they're in denial and not admitting out loud or even really to themselves out loud that they have a problem. How would you go about inviting somebody who's listening to this to attend their first recovery meeting? I mean, there's a lot of fear that goes into that in pretty much everybody walking through that door the first time. So how would you encourage somebody to do that?
Well, thank you for asking me that. I'll indirectly answer the question, which is that I had mentioned earlier that I was over 20 years sober until I realized exactly what the problem is. And the problem is I take a drink and the drink takes me. That once it touches my lips, the alcohol touches my lips, or the drug touches my lips, or however I'm taking it. And this doesn't happen every time, but as an addict, it's going to happen 99% of the time, which is the phenomena of craving sets in, and then you cannot stop. And so the answer for that is complete abstinence. They say that in the big book. The problem is that we drink because it provides a solution for how we're feeling. And though it's injurious, it's so elusive, we can't find it anyplace else. This is what it says in the doctor's opinion. And so it's so elusive, it's the only place we can get this high. We can't get it from living life. So we keep going on, and we can't recognize the true from the false. The false is that if we drink, we're going to, the truth is if that we drink, we're going to set off this phenomenon of craving. And the false is that we can do it one more time, that this time it's going to be different, that one day I will stop. And then the unmanageability of the first step is not the consequences. The unmanageability is that we cannot manage the decision to stay stopped. That's where we can't recognize the truth from the false, that we think that we can stay stopped. So if you're listening and you have a chronic history of relapse, not even relapse, but you swear off, you promise God, you promise your parents, you promise your wife, you promise your husband that you're not going to do that again, and then you go back out and do it again. Well, you are of the hopeless variety beyond human aid that is in need of a spiritual experience. And you can only find that in AA or NA or whatever your particular addiction is. And you have the desperation of a drowning man, then you'll go to a meeting. It's hard to encourage people to go to meetings if it doesn't resonate with them, if they don't think that the meeting, everybody's of the opinion it doesn't work, but you can forge all through that if you're believing in God, and that if you take the steps, you have the spiritual awakening, you become a new person. So you can't get that anywhere. You can't get that in religion. you can only get it in a built-in program that's a bare bones approach to having a spiritual experience, where you stop thinking about yourself and you're not nailed to yourself any longer. You're thinking of how you can help other people.
Mm.
And it's a built-in approach to that too. The 12 steps says that having had a spiritual experience, we try to carry this message to addicts who still suffer. And it's actually, the reason for doing that is they also put in there for selfish addicts that, look, it's going to ensure immunity against your next drink.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been great. Do you feel there's anything else that you need to share at this point?
I can't think of anything, so I guess no, there isn't. But it's been a pleasure to do this, and I hope that one person can hear this and again be so low in their addiction that they're willing to do anything, including going to meeting. And I would suggest somebody to go to meetings, and if they think that it's not the right meeting, go to another meeting. You will find a meeting, somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to look. And maybe the first meeting is what you're going to need. Also, there's a great power in fellowship and in community, and you're going to get that. You walk into an AA meeting, there is no requirements, there's no membership, there's no dues. People are going to welcome you. They're going to tell you to come in. We've been waiting for you. We want you here. Doesn't matter if you smell, if you're drunk, you're going to be very much welcomed, and they're going to tell you to keep coming back. And I think for many people, I was one of those that's what I needed, But I do believe in the big book approach to the steps, which is for a new person to try and get them through it very quickly, because it says that where it says we've lost the power of choice when it comes to alcohol. That's where you've lost a part of your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end it says we have no defense against the first drink. That book was written 80 years ago. They've never changed that, saying time will give you the defense. But in that paragraph, it says that we cannot recall to mind with sufficient force even what happened a week or a month ago. So that week or a month ago, that may be all the time you have to have a spiritual experience before you go back out again.
Mm.
And my own experience with that is that when I did stop the alcohol and the drugs, and I would go to my mother's house and lay up there, it usually within a week or a month, I was back out again.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, John. This has been very meaningful for me, and I hope it's been meaningful for you too.
Yes, it has been. Justin, thanks very much for asking me to do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. John, really appreciate his time and his honesty, his sincerity. You can, like I said earlier, you can really hear that sincerity and that effort to be completely honest. I love it. All right. Well, there's another one down. Just a few left in the month of December. Well, a handful left in the month of December. And then we get back to things on January 6th, getting back at the beginning of the new year with Robert P. and his conversation about being alone versus being lonely in recovery. I'm excited about that. Once again, if you find value in RICO 12, please share this with others. Share it with those who have a need from your perspective, from the urging of your higher power to share these things with, and consider donating if that's where your heart is leading you. It helps us carry this message to more addicts who suffer. All right. Remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together.